Today I will share with you a very easy coloring technique and then a few layout enhancements that changes the look of your cards. Welcome to Creative Coloring with Erum, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. This video is part of the Build-A-Flower Semi-Double Chrysanthemum release, and we have some beautiful inspiration for you as always on the blog hop. From what I've seen till now, the color palette is everywhere from yellows to purples to blues to pinks. The projects are indeed very lovely. Now on to my projects. Yes, I'm sharing two projects, one here and one on the blog. I have heat embossed the flower on the 9x12 watercolor cardstock in rose gold embossing powder. And I will use the watercolor brush markers in Rouge and Citrus Burst from the Winter Wonderland watercolor brush marker set. I will be doing some very easy and quick ink smooshing today, but then I'll show you how to step it up as well. First step is to apply ink onto the watercolor palette. I'm using the large watercolor palette from Altenew and I'll link to this in the supply list. It is super handy for watercoloring or even heat embossing so far. To make my smooshing process faster and in order to get a more textured look, I'll dry in between layers using my heat tool. I applied both shades of inks on the palette, by the way, so in some areas they have mixed to form a peachy color. Now go back in as many times as you want to and keep drying in between layers. Make sure not to have your heat tool too close as it's an heat embossed image and you will burn the embossing powder. I'll also go back in and add just the Rouge ink on the palette to get more of those concentrated Rouge splatters and then repeat the same with the Citrus Burst. Another faster way to get this effect is to simply apply splatters onto the flower image of the pigment you want, but I know some of you are not yet comfortable with splatters, so this is one way of doing that. Even though irregular splatters, weird looking splatters, or whatever kind of splatters you are afraid of ending up with will look just as good. Now you can stop here. Our flowers are done. You can dry it, die cut it, and you are good. But if you want to step it up, you can take your watercolor brush marker. In this case, I'm taking the Rouge watercolor brush marker and add detail to the end of the flower petals. That is the area that is closer to the flower center. Just a blob of paint will do because this is not the kind of flower where it will be noticeable if you made mistakes. But yes, a dark blob of paint will show depth at the end of the petal. I'll also diffuse this a bit with a wet paintbrush. I'm using one of the round brushes that Altenew recently came out with, and I've just applied a bit of water. Again, not a necessary step, but if you don't like ink blobs, I'd suggest you do that to soften that paint. I'll repeat the same steps for the leaves as well. I'll use Limeade and Moss watercolor brush markers. I'll first apply the Limeade pigment onto the palette and smoosh my watercolor cardstock over it. Then scribble some moss pigment onto the palette and smoosh the cardstock again. I'll repeat this till I'm happy with the look. And again, for those splatters and grungy textured look, I'll apply moss pigment with no or minimal water. Then flip my cardstock over the pigment to get concentrated splatters or tiny blobs of pigment. Now dry the images and add splatters of clean water to add more texture if you want to. I love this look and I always do this. You can completely skip this step if you don't want to add the textured look. Now sop up the water with a clean tissue paper. Now you can just take those and adhere onto a panel, pop a sentiment, throw in some sequins and your card is ready. But if you want to step it up and add more details to your cards, then you can do a couple of things. One, You can either add gorgeous watercolor to your background, which you know I love to do, and 2, add an element, or 3, do both of 1 and 2. For my element, I'm adding a grid panel. I've done this previously in various shapes, hearts, circles, and rectangles. Today it's going to be a rectangular panel for which I've cut a panel that is 1 inch smaller than my card front. Now I don't have a coordinating die to cut a rectangular window out of this panel and make my frame. So I'll do it the old-fashioned way by drawing margins and then cutting out the window with my craft knife. Once I have my frame, I'll use the grid cover die cut and adhere the frame on top of it. Add foam tape behind it and add it all around the frame to make the frame sturdy. You can step this step up by converting this into a shaker too. I didn't do that. Next, I adhered this onto a card front and then placed my images and didn't like it at all. So I took my panel off the grid frame that I adhered, that is. I used a heat gun to take it off and then decided to add watercolor to the background. So I'm combining both those options that I discussed with you earlier, the 1 and 2, and then moving on straight to 3. So what I do is I use the Limeade and the Moss watercolor pigment and add a light color wash to the background. And while I was adding color, I thought since we are smooshing, let's just smoosh the background too. And that's what I did. The process was a lot faster. I also added a few splatters just to add a bit more darker green pigment, but still keeping it a little on the light side. And I also added a few splatters of a slightly darker green, which was from Moss watercolor brush marker. Now I'll adhere my grid frame again, and before adhering it completely, I'll place a foam tape where my flower is going to go, just underneath it. What this does is it will help the grid stay in place and not dip. The tape will provide a bit of a support. Then I'll adhere the images with foam tape. Now to add extra touches to the floral arrangement, I used the Create-A-Wreath die and that die over there. Die cut it out of gold glitter cardstock. And now I'm going to add it to my arrangement. I used to do this a lot. This is one of my favorite dies to add in between flower arrangements. And just look how the arrangement pops up instantly. I heat emboss the sentiment from a sparkled stamp set in rose gold and then adhere a thin strip of the same glitter cardstock onto the bottom edge of the sentiment tab. I'm just going to adhere a few anti-gold sequins and I'm done. I hope you enjoyed today's session. Please give the video a thumbs up if you did. Don't forget to stop by the blog. I'm sharing another project there where I used mixed media inks as watercolors. And that background you see is something that I'll teach in my upcoming Altenew Academy class. Thank you for watching. Bye.
Hello there! Did that video just spark your creativity? And do you want more project ideas and inspiration videos too? Well, if you do, please make sure that you subscribe to the Altenew YouTube channel. Also, make sure that you do click that notification bell so you don't miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye!